One could make the argument that the crossover segment is becoming increasingly crowded. And I would have to say, I tend to agree with that argument. It's a pretty compelling and good argument. So that does beg the question, how does the 2014 Dodge Journey you see here really fit into that crowded segment? And I'm going to make the point that small changes to the feature set and size of a crossover, combined with its price, can really make or break how well it appeals to buyers within that segment. And the Dodge Journey you see here, I think, can make a pretty compelling argument for that. I'm Greg Kavanaugh of the Gallup Journey magazine. If you just found me out here on the old interwebs, I should tell you, these are my own personal, unscripted. In fact, I shoot these videos myself. So you need to expect that this isn't going to be the most polished, read from the dealership brochure video you've ever seen. However, if you're looking for a real world experience and views on a vehicle you might be interested in, stick around for the next few minutes and let's explore these ideas. So I think the Journey's niche is in the fact of both its size and its feature set within the competitive and crowded crossover segment. And here's how I think it should be thought of. While it is indeed a 7-passenger vehicle, you should not think of it as competing with other types of 7-passenger vehicles on the market, like for instance Acadia or an Explorer and so on. As you guys maybe know, I recently drove a Sequoia and that thing is huge, but I still complained about its overall cargo capacity. And really frankly, the Journey is no different if you think of it as a 7-passenger vehicle. However, I contend that if you think of it more as a 5-passenger vehicle that can be a 7-passenger vehicle in a pinch, then you really benefit from its smaller size and its maneuverability and even its price set. Starting off in the mid-20s and kind of working your way up from there, it is indeed cheaper than those other 7-passenger alternatives. So Dodge, of course, Chrysler as a whole, is really good about packaging lots of storage areas. If you think of their minivans, those things are the staples of, storage compartments. And the Journey benefits from some of that feature set as well. So you can see here, this is my camera case where I keep a lot of my camera gear and stuff. It's not particularly big, and you can see it takes up a lot of that space behind the third row. With it down, you're getting quite a bit of cargo space. And what I like about the Journey here is you have a really nice deep well back here. It's deeper than a lot of the other ones I've driven, and there's some that other ones don't even have. There are 2 wells in the second row below the floor, below the feet of the passengers in the second row. And then also the front seat, the front passenger seat, also contains cargo storage capacity inside that if you flip it up. So when you factor in all these nice little niches and cubbies with the fact that it can be a 7-passenger vehicle in a pinch, the Journey makes a pretty compelling case for being very versatile and working in a lot of different situations. The second row of the Journey is where you're going to find kind of that space difference, and the third row as well, between some of those larger SUVs on the market, larger crossovers really. And I'm not saying that's a demerit against the Journey, but that is one of the differences in the size of this vehicle. Now, the second row does slide fore and aft, and I'm going to pretty much say right now, for an adult to sit in the third row, you need to have this second row almost as far up and far forward as it will go. It kind of depends on the height of your driver. Now I'm 5'8", and with it all the way forward like this, the space is not terrible, which makes the third row somewhat usable. However, if you have a much taller driver up front here, you're going to need to move the seat back a bit, which pretty much takes away all of your toe space in the third row, which makes it much less usable. Now, you'll notice these doors open 90 degrees, almost 90 degrees, which is really nice. And they slide forward and aft pretty easily as well, which gives you reasonably good access to the third row. So again, as a 5-passenger vehicle that's a third row in a pinch, it actually works perfectly. So I'm driving the SXT trim level of the Journey, which is kind of right smack dab in the middle. There's like 5 different trim levels, I think. Above this you have Crew and RT even. Now, I really think that's where the Journey can start to really make its case, because It's definitely cheaper than some of the larger 7-passenger crossovers out there, and it falls nicely in line with things like the Escape and stuff, but it's a little bit more versatile and has a little bit more space than those, a little bit bigger engine, and so forth. So starting in the mid-20s, this one's optioned up to the high 20s. The SXT, I think, really represents a pretty good bang for your buck. I have the, I really like the infotainment package here, nice large screen, nav, I mean, not nav, but sat. A lot of that kind of feature set, of course, power windows and locks and all those things, but also driving lights in the front, power seats, as a whole, just a lot of the features you'd want and not necessarily a lot of the superfluous ones you don't need. So I think that's where the Journey really makes its best case, at that size and price segment that falls nicely between the other parts of the crossover segment, and what makes the Journey definitely worth looking at. Now, Dodge and Chrysler and the American automakers as a whole, but particularly the Chrysler group, had been really criticized for their low rent, rental grade interiors. And, a lot of people said when Fiat came in, Chrysler started to step up its game on the interiors. And I don't know how much truth there is to that, but I do have to say the interior in here it's definitely nice. Like I said, big screen, really easy to use, the infotainment system. Doesn't have a backup camera, which I found really odd. The general aesthetic in here, kind of this rounded look without being swoopy, it just works. I don't think it's going to seem dated in years to come. It's not overly raw or superfluous in any respect like that. You got good cargo here in the armrest, nicely placed cup holders and cargo space in front of those. So ergonomically, it just works. Nice large dials, but without excessively large font. It doesn't scream luxury vehicle, but it works, and it's nice, and it doesn't detract from the vehicle in any way. Talking about the 3.6 liter Pentastar is almost unnecessary, given that I've already driven it in two very different vehicles. I drove it in the Wrangler, and I drove it in the Ram. And of course, you can get that Pentastar in a 300, a 200, and so on. I mean, it's become a ubiquitous engine for the Chrysler group, and I have to admit, it ought to be. 283 horsepower, I think, is what it's rated at here in the Journey, and it's made it in this case to a 6-speed transmission. Keep in mind they also have it made it to 8 and 9 speeds as well, and it just works well. In the Ram, it felt adequate. Here it feels more than adequate. The Journey is almost downright sprightly, and I have to say at $17.25, it's returning decent fuel economy. That's one tick better than something like a front-wheel drive Acadia, although that is actually a bigger vehicle, and it's a little bit down on something like an Escape or the RAV4. So it's kind of in the middle of the road. But the performance it returns, I have to say, is quite good. It's a refined engine. The transmission is never hunting. I mean, I just have to say I'm pretty impressed with it, and it works really well in the Journey. Now the chassis and the body motions, the handling, the steering doesn't quite match that Pentastar. Now I'm not going to try and say that the Pentastar makes the Journey some sort of SRT version, right? But it makes it feel somewhat athletic, whereas the handling is more kind of adequate or above adequate. There's some body roll. It's generally comfortable, but it's not excessively refined and smooth. It's just like you'd expect from a modern car. Composed, but nothing to write home about. The steering is very similar. It's basically something that's easy to forget. It doesn't feel overly darty. It doesn't feel overly slow. On the highway, it's got a nice uncenter feel, so it doesn't feel like it's drifting. You can put a lot of miles on the Journey. So it's a very easy vehicle to commute in, to run chores in, and overall just to kind of forget about when it comes to that aspect. It's important to me to give a thanks to the people who make these videos happen. First of all, I want to give a special shout out to the Tate's Automotive Group for letting me drive the Journey this time around. They're located here in Gallup, New Mexico, as well as in parts of Arizona. There are links in the description. Big thanks to those guys for giving me the test drive this time around. I also want to give a personal shout out to Martin, one of my viewers and readers. I really appreciate the encouragement you give and contribution, and it's just really something that keeps me going and makes me want to keep doing this, and I know that people like them, so big thanks to you. And of course, a big thanks to all the viewers out there. I appreciate you guys watching, liking, subscribing, sharing, and most of all, I really appreciate your comments. I love to read those and respond to those, and I like the conversations that spark from these videos, good and bad. So I appreciate that, guys. I'll see you next time. You know, the Journey is not quite as frugal as things like the Escape, you know, or the RAV4. Wow, look at this monster truck that's driving by me right here. Can you guys see that? Thing's huge.